Stop right there and imagine this for a moment. A silence that has lasted longer than anyone expected suddenly breaks, and when it does, it changes everything you thought you understood. This is not just another story. This is the moment where everything hidden finally comes into the light, and if you stay till the end, you will witness a revelation so unexpected it will stay with you long after the story is over. Do not just read, feel every moment, and when you reach the end, tell me what you would have done differently. It all began with tension that no one could ignore. Not loud, not obvious, but present in a way that made every small interaction feel heavier than usual. Miles Wei had been quiet for far too long, his silence creating more questions than answers. People speculated, wondered, tried to read between moments that seemed ordinary but carried something deeper underneath. On the other side stood Dylan Wang, whose presence alone seemed to hold its own kind of intensity. There was no open conflict, no dramatic confrontation, but there was something unspoken, something waiting to be addressed. And then came the moment no one expected. It was not announced. It was not prepared. It simply happened. Miles Wei decided to speak. The setting was simple, almost too simple for something that carried so much weight. A quiet space, no distractions, just an atmosphere that seemed to understand the importance of what was about to unfold. Dylan Wang was there, calm on the outside, yet clearly aware that this moment mattered. For a few seconds, nothing happened. No words, no movement, just silence. But this silence was different. It was not empty. It was full of everything that had not been said until now. Then Miles Wei finally looked up, his expression steady, not defensive, not uncertain, but composed in a way that suggested he had already thought through everything he was about to say. When he spoke, it was not loud. It was not rushed. It was real. He did not start with explanations or justifications. Instead, he acknowledged the situation, not as something to avoid, but as something that deserved honesty. He spoke about how things had unfolded, how moments that seemed simple had become complicated because of assumptions and silence. Each word landed with intention. Dylan Wang did not interrupt. He listened, fully present, his attention focused not just on the words, but on the meaning behind them. And then Miles Wei said something that changed everything. He made it clear that not everything was what it seemed, that what people had interpreted, what they had believed, was only part of the truth. He spoke about actions that were misunderstood, moments that were taken out of context, and decisions that were made with reasons no one had fully seen. But more than anything, he spoke about respect. He made it clear that his actions were never meant to create conflict, never meant to challenge or replace anything that already existed. Instead, they were part of something that had its own purpose, something that was not fully understood until now. The atmosphere shifted, not dramatically but noticeably. Dylan Wang's expression changed, not into shock in the way people might expect, but into something deeper, something closer to realization. The kind of reaction that comes when pieces finally begin to fit together. For the first time, the tension between them did not feel like distance. It felt like clarity waiting to settle. Dylan Wang responded, not with confrontation, but with calm curiosity. He asked questions not to challenge, but to understand. And Miles Wei answered, not with hesitation, but with openness. What made this moment powerful was not conflict. It was honesty. The conversation moved forward, slowly, carefully, as if both of them understood that this was not just about clearing misunderstandings, but about redefining everything that had led to this point. There were pauses, moments where silence returned, but this time it was different. It was no longer filled with uncertainty, but with processing, with understanding, with acceptance. And then came the part no one expected. Miles Wei did not just explain. He revealed something. Something that had been hidden behind everything else. He spoke about the intention behind certain actions, about the awareness he had of how things might be perceived, and about the choice he made to step forward anyway, not out of conflict, but out of necessity. That revelation changed everything. Because suddenly the story was no longer about assumptions. It was about perspective. Dylan Wang took a moment before responding. Not because he did not know what to say, but because he understood that what he said next mattered just as much. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something new. Understanding. He acknowledged what he had heard, not just the surface of it, but the depth behind it. He admitted that there were moments he misunderstood, moments where silence led him to conclusions that were not entirely accurate. And in that admission, something shifted again. The distance between them closed, not physically, but emotionally. This was no longer a moment of tension. It was a moment of resolution. What followed was not dramatic, but it was powerful in its simplicity. They reached a point where everything that needed to be said had been said. No hidden meanings, no unspoken doubts, just clarity. And sometimes, that is more impactful than any dramatic ending. As they stood there, the atmosphere felt lighter, not because the situation was simple, but because it was understood. The weight that once existed between them was no longer there. It had been replaced with something else. Respect. Understanding. Closure. But this was not just an ending. It was also a beginning. Because moments like this do not just resolve the past, they shape what comes next. And now, as you reach the end of this story, think about this. How many misunderstandings exist simply because no one chose to speak? How many moments could change if honesty replaced silence?
Do not just let this story pass by.
Share your thoughts. Tell me what you think about what Miles Wei said. Because sometimes, the most shocking moments are not the loudest ones. They are the ones that reveal the truth we were not expecting. The moment the truth settled between them, something changed in a way no one watching could have predicted. It was not loud, not dramatic, but deeply powerful, like a quiet shift that rearranges everything without making a sound. Miles Wei did not step back after speaking. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, steady, composed, as if he understood that what came next mattered even more than what had already been said. Across from him, Dylan Wang stood with a different kind of stillness, not the silence of tension, but the silence of someone processing something real. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Dylan Wang did something no one expected. He smiled. Not widely, not dramatically, but in a way that carried understanding, the kind of expression that only appears when confusion finally gives way to clarity. It was subtle, yet it changed the atmosphere instantly. He took a step closer. Not as a challenge, not as a confrontation, but as a gesture that closed the distance that had once felt impossible to cross. The space between them no longer felt heavy. It felt neutral, almost calm, like something that had finally found balance. Then he spoke. His voice carried honesty, but also something deeper, something that had not been present before. He admitted that there were moments where he misread everything, where silence led him to believe things that were not entirely true. He acknowledged that he had allowed assumptions to take the place of communication, and that in doing so, he had unintentionally created the distance he was trying to understand. But then he said something that shifted everything again. He said that despite everything, he never doubted one thing: the sincerity behind Miles Wei's actions. That single statement carried more weight than any dramatic response ever could, because it revealed something unexpected. Respect had always been there. Even in the middle of confusion, even when things were unclear, there was still a level of understanding that had not been completely lost. Miles Wei listened, not interrupting, not reacting immediately, but allowing those words to settle. And when he finally responded, his expression softened, not out of relief, but out of recognition. Recognition that what stood between them was no longer conflict. It was resolution. But the story did not stop there, because there was still one presence that connected everything.
Shen Yue.
She had been at the center of everything, not as a point of division, but as the reason behind the questions, the silence, and ultimately, the truth that had now been revealed. And just when it felt like everything had been said, she appeared. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but naturally, as if this moment had always been leading to her presence. Her expression carried something calm, yet meaningful, a quiet awareness of everything that had just taken place. She looked at both of them, not with uncertainty, not with confusion, but with clarity. There was no need for introductions, no need for explanations. She already knew, not every detail, but enough to understand what had changed. For a brief moment, the three of them stood in silence. But this silence was different from all the others that had come before. It was complete. Shen Yue stepped forward, her presence bringing a sense of balance to the moment. She spoke gently, her voice carrying both honesty and calm. She acknowledged what had happened, not just the words that were spoken, but the courage it took to say them. Then she did something unexpected. She thanked them. Not in a dramatic way, but sincerely. Because in her eyes, this was not a moment of conflict. It was a moment of truth. And truth, no matter how complicated, always carries value. Her words created a shift that neither of them could ignore. It reminded them that this was never about competition, never about choosing sides. It was about understanding, about clarity, about allowing things to be seen as they truly are. Miles Wei took a step back, not as a withdrawal, but as a quiet acknowledgement of where things now stood. His role in the story had never been about taking something away, but about bringing something into the open. And now that it was done, he did not need to stay at the center of it. Dylan Wang remained, but not in the same way as before. There was no tension left in his posture, no uncertainty in his expression. What replaced it was something steady, something grounded. Understanding. Shen Yue turned to him, her gaze steady, her expression soft but certain. There was no need for a long conversation, no need to revisit everything again. Because everything had already been revealed. What followed was not dramatic. It was simple. And sometimes, simplicity carries the most meaning. They spoke briefly not about the past, but about the present. About what they had learned, about what they now understood, about what they were willing to do differently moving forward. Each word felt lighter. Each moment felt clearer. And in that clarity, something new began. Not a sudden transformation, not an instant resolution, but a quiet beginning built on honesty. Miles Wei watched for a moment, not with regret, not with longing, but with a calm acceptance. He had played his part, and now the story was moving forward without needing him at the center. He turned, not dramatically, but naturally, and walked away. Not as someone leaving, but as someone who understood that some moments are not meant to be held on to. They are meant to lead to something else. And as he moved forward, there was no sense of loss. Only completion. Back where it all began, Shen Yue and Dylan Wang stood together, not in uncertainty, not in silence, but in something far more meaningful. Presence. The kind that does not need to be questioned. The kind that does not need to be explained. The kind that simply exists. And as the story reaches its final moment, there is no dramatic ending, no overwhelming conclusion. Only a quiet truth. That sometimes, the most shocking words are not the ones that create conflict. They are the ones that bring understanding. And now, as you sit with this ending, think about this. If silence can create so much confusion, what could honesty create in your own story? Do not just let this end here. Share your thoughts. Tell me what you think about what Miles Wei said and how everything unfolded. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are not the ones that shout the loudest. They are the ones that speak just enough to change everything.